Welcome to Waterside Chat. Tom Sadler talks with guests who depend on healthy oceans and fisheries for their recreation and livelihoods. And now, let's get started.
Well, welcome to today's Waterside Chat. For the next few months, the Waterside Chat will focus on the 50th anniversary of the Magnuson Stevens Act. The network got its start in 1993 with a goal of conserving fish populations and their habitat and ensuring the long-term health and productivity of our oceans. We recruited a diverse membership, including regional and commercial fishing groups, recreational fishing groups, aquaria, and small coastal conservation organizations. Since then, the network has played a key role in putting teeth into the legislation that is now commonly called the Magnuson Stevens Act. Over the next few months, I'll be chatting with network members, both new and old, to hear their stories about what the Magnuson Stevens Act and the network means to them. Today, my guest is one of our Network Policy Council members, Lyf Gildersleeve. Lyf is a second-generation fishmonger and owner of Flying Fish Company in Portland, Oregon, a business that was started by his dad. Besides fishing, he has experience in aquaculture, aquaponics, advocacy, and public speaking. Lyf actively promotes and protects sustainable use of our seafood resources, aligning his business with the most sustainable fishermen and farmers in the Northwest and only the most certifiably trusted sources around the world. I'm excited he could join us. We'll be learning about Lyf, his business, his experience with the Marine Fish Conservation Network, and his work in marine conservation. Welcome, Lyf.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you all having me. It's always good to connect and work on good, positive things.
Awesome. So we'll get right started with who is Lyf Gildersleeve? So where were you born? Where were you raised? Where'd you go to school?
Yeah, well, so like Tom said, my name is Lyf Gildersleeve. I own Flying Fish Company in Portland, and I am originally from a small town in northern Idaho called Sandpoint, Idaho. And my proudest medal of honor is I'm a second generation fishmonger. I love saying that. Just like
awesome.
How many, you only know so many fishmongers, especially a second generation fishmonger. So, how that became in my family is my dad used to fly little Cessna planes, single engine planes, and he was a flight instructor. And Sandpoint's about 350 miles from Seattle, due east as the crow flies. So he was flying back and forth from Seattle all the time with instructing people on how to fly. So he'd pick up a box of fish in Seattle and bring it over inland into northern Idaho where there wasn't good seafood, and he would sell it there. So that's how the company got its name, Flying Fish Company, in 1979. The year before I was born. So I was born in 80. That started in 79. So growing up as a kid, we sold out of a fish truck on the corner of the parking lot for a lot of years, and then eventually we got a little shack on the corner that we would sell on Wednesdays and Fridays. So we'd get fish in on Tuesdays and get it ready to sell for Wednesday, and then same on Thursday for Friday. So it was just a part-time gig. But that was my growing up, and then we had a couple fish and chips restaurants in Sandpoint in the 80s and 90s as well. And so that's kind of my early years of flying fish and getting into the fish business. Then I studied aquaculture in college down in Florida at Harbor Branch Oceanographic, and then worked in a shrimp hatchery down in the Florida Keys for a little while, and then got an itch to go join my buddies that were in Utah ski bumming, and did that for maybe 6-7 years until the recession hit in 08, 09. I was in real estate at the time and got laid off from my full-time job. And couldn't really find other work because it was a recession. There wasn't a lot of people hiring. And I was like, well, I know fish. So I went back to the fish business. I got a $10,000 loan and got a farmer's market tent set up and tables and coolers and a scale and all that stuff, and started selling fish at the farmer's markets in Utah. I was pulling fish in from the coast into Salt Lake and then selling it up in Park City. So that's really how I started my own branch of the company back in 08, 09. And now I live in Portland. I moved the business to Portland about 15 years ago, and raising my kids here. They're 13 and 16 now, and have a thriving business. It's a restaurant primarily now. I still am a fish market as well, but it's a 25 employee, pretty high volume restaurant and fish market in Southeast Portland. And, it's awesome. It's been a great ride.
When you're not in the restaurant, when you're not fishmongering, what do you do to entertain yourself? The hobbies and
That's
stuff
an
like that.
hour conversation in itself. I'm kind of a big all over the place kind of a guy. I'm on my way up to the ski hill right now to enjoy some last minute skiing for the year. It's been light snowfall, so I'm praying for the salmon have enough water this year in the rivers in the summertime. But I ski a lot. I mountain bike. I sail. I backpack, truly all of the above. So I do yoga for exercise on a daily basis. Well, not daily, but as my main form of exercise in the slower months when there's not as much outdoor activity. But, mountain biking and skiing and lots of outdoor stuff.
If it's outdoors, you're out there doing it.
Big time. Yeah.
Awesome.
Fly fishing or regular fishing. Through my business, I take people, I've got a food education, a little nonprofit that I started, a 501c3 that I started to educate people. It's called Sustainable Fishmonger. And what I do is I bring people on fishing trips and, oyster farm tours, and we do sushi rolling classes and that sort of stuff to try to bring people closer to their food sources because as kind of like with going to a winery, once you go to an oyster farm and have that experience where you get to see where these products are coming from, you'll make better choices in the future about when you're buying that product. You're like, oh, I remember when I went to Hama Hama, it was amazing. And that experience on the coast and the ocean smell and all this stuff, it's really memorable. So I try to use that platform to create memories for people to bring them closer to their food sources, whether that be reeling in a fish or going to an oyster farm.
Oh, that's terrific. What a great thing to do to really connect people to what they're eating.
Yes.
That's fantastic. So, business start, let's talk a little bit about Flying Fish Company. Business started in Idaho, sort of not like where the immediate go-to location of, hey, that's where I should have a seafood market. So tell me a little, share some history with the business.
Yeah, well, like I said, Idaho obviously is not a place that's known for seafood because, the saltwater tides don't quite make it into Idaho. A few mountain ranges along the way. No. So, it's an interesting thing to create a business in a place where there's not as much seafood, because I experienced this when I first opened my own branch of the business in Utah, where sometimes you look at it as an opportunity where there's nobody else doing it. So there's an opportunity there. But then also there's the other side of that equation where there's kind of a reason why there's not things in some places, because that clientele may not be as accustomed to eating seafood or as versed in the different types of seafood that there are. For Sandpoint and for my family growing up, it was just a quality and availability kind of a thing. There were some people that, a lot of people transplanted to northern Idaho. They always have, they still are. So, it's already a clientele that kind of knows seafood. Mm-hmm. But there was parts in Utah when I had the business set up there that people would rather just go catch their own trout in the river, and they didn't give a shit about scallops, or albacore tuna. So it's an interesting, equation to set up businesses in places where they don't really fit all the way, but there is an opportunity when, because grocery store seafood is obviously often not the highest quality.
For sure. So your dad flew Cessnas?
Yeah. Yeah.
172, 182, 152?
I'm not sure which numbers they were. It's funny. I've always been more of a water guy and a land guy, more than a airplane guy. So I didn't really engage too much in the flying side of the equation. And he kind of, got out of that side of the business in the 80s when I was a young kid, because again, I was born in '80, so he wasn't really flying a lot when I was a kid, so it wasn't really my deal.
When I was working for my dad, I learned to fly, and
you did.
I learned to fly in a Cessna 172. And so when you said Cessnas, like, oh, I know those.
Yeah.
So
I know they were the single engine. Planes, not the dual, but instrument rated and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, some of those tag words.
Yeah, it's an interesting. My instructor said, "You've learned enough to be dangerous to yourself," and that's about as far as I got with it. And then I moved down here. So, let's talk a little bit about the excuse me. Let's talk a little bit about the Magnuson Stevens Act and the network, and what drew you to the network. Lyf, how'd you?
Well, thanks to Rob Vandermark is who got me originally involved with the network. We were both in DC doing some policy work for the Magnuson Act and for its ecosystem-based approach to management. And we engaged and had a great conversation and stayed in touch. And it was something that you guys, it seems like the network over the years has ebbed and flowed some as far as the effort put in, and it was a time when you guys were growing and getting more constituents on the teams, and that's really, to me, what is really fascinating is having that balance. What you guys do a good job of having that balance of the conservation. You've got the fishing groups. I come from a unique position of being the retailer from a fish market and also restaurateur. The culinary side. So that was always great to me is having all those voices together at one table where we're all tackling things. And I really think that has the depth, the bandwidth of experience there and of width of different areas where we're all coming from has a lot of value when it comes to our voice and our opinion that we can collectively put together and bring to the table to say, hey, here's this collective voice that is all thinking this thing. And of course, there's times when we don't all agree on everything, and that's totally fine as well. But I just like the component of having the diversity on there.
I think that's one of the network's signature value propositions, if you will, is having that network of different opinions working together. So let me step to why do you see the Magnuson Stevens Act as an important piece of marine law?
Well, it's the basis of everything, right? So without it, it's what created our exclusive economic zone and allowed us to be able to govern our oceans and manage our oceans in a way to keep the foreign fleets off. So that's the really guiding principle of it all is that if we want to create stability in our fisheries and our coastal communities, then we have to have some framework in place, because humans have a tendency to, not be able to self-manage. so
I noticed.
Yeah. So, I think that's kind of the guiding light of it all, is that it's something that, creates framework. And, I think that framework naturally needs to evolve. And that's kind of where we're at now, right? Is we've been trying to, try to write some new legislation with the renewal of the MSA to be able to have that adapt into what is currently on the platform or on the table, as far as climate change and changing ocean conditions and stocks moving, and there has to be some flexibility, although that's a tricky word in policy.
Sure.
But it's that's important to have it be an ever-evolving document.
But you speak to the sort of fundamentals of the Magnuson Act, and pre-Magnuson, it was a free-for-all out there, and
that's right.
You see it as having brought some order to the chaos.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that there's order to the chaos. Nationally, our fisheries are some of the best managed fisheries in the world. And that's something that we should be really proud of. Now, with that being said, we still have some gaps in that equation where we're still importing 80 to 90% of the seafood that we consume in the United States. So we have these great fisheries here in the United States, but we're still, like, a lot of times we're exporting our great fisheries, our sustainable, nutritious, delicious fish to other countries, because other countries are willing to spend more money for that albacore tuna or squid or sockeye salmon or whatever it may be, live Dungeness crab. And then we import this, inferior blue swimming crab from Indonesia because it's cheaper than our Dungeness crab. So we manage the fisheries great, but then we're exporting a lot of that seafood and then importing an inferior product. So that's something that needs to shift because we've got to create a better value proposition for the customers here, for the domestic market, so that they recognize how great our fisheries are and how well we're managing them, and shift that where we create a better value for that product, so consumers are more willing to spend a little bit extra on our own domestic fish.
For sure. So you wear two interesting hats, both as a restaurateur and a fishmonger. So let's talk a little bit about how the culinary community looks at the Magnuson Act. I mean, how do they see it? They weren't first line impact, but now they are.
Yeah, it's something we still need to continue to work on, Tom. And obviously that's what this kind of a platform is here to do, is to bring that relationship to policy on a national level and bring it home to even that first step, to the culinary aspect, because that's the first step in sustainability or knowledge, is the chefs, the markets. And then the next step is to actually get it to the consumer, and get them making better choices or be more knowledgeable about the MSA. So, and the reason why I say all this is because honestly, people don't really know much about the MSA. Those of us that are kind of in the weeds with it and we know a lot about it, we're in the industry and that we know about it. But when it comes to the culinary world, their relationship to sustainability and fisheries is more on like a Monterey Bay Seafood Watch program, where it's more tangible, where they can input bluefin tuna and get some results with that, whether that's a good thing to purchase or not. And same with farm raised salmon or whatever it may be. Whereas the MSA is the guiding light to sustainability certification, let's say, whether it be Monterey Bay Aquarium or MSC, Marine Stewardship Council, that sort of thing. But most people are kind of disconnected from MSA. So I think that's part of what we need to continue to do, is try to find ways to connect them more with the actual policy, or not too, or we just keep doing what we're doing and we make sure that that next step is engaged in the public, which obviously Monterey Bay and those kind of places are engaging.
And you've been involved in that culinary community education, correct?
I am, yeah. A couple things I wanted to mention with that is I'm part of the Surfrider Foundation, is another nonprofit. They have a ocean friendly restaurant program that I've been part of for the last couple of years, and the principles of that are to don't use styrofoam, single use stuff like plastic cups and all that. You're not allowed to use that stuff if you want to be part of the program. So that's all great because it's a way to let consumers know that this restaurant cares about the ocean and they care about the environment, and so that's been a good step to educate people. The next thing is the Monterey Bay just released a new green best choice restaurant program, and what that does, it just got released. There was an article in the New York Times last week, and it's a new program that it's much more simple to get in than their old restaurant programs are, because all it does is restaurants that have one item, any item that they have that's a green choice, so it's the best choice when it comes to sustainability and which species to sell. So a restaurant can put that Monterey Bay little Seafood Watch logo on the menu item to say that, hey, this item is the best choice when it comes to sustainability and the fisheries. So those are good programs that again bring people a little bit closer to that realization that their choice does matter, that they're choosing the best choice possible, and those kind of programs I think are really beneficial to connect to the consumer a little bit better.
Is it fair to say that an educated consumer then can help drive public policy towards better results? Is that,
For sure.
continuing that loop?
Yeah, I think that those organizations do a good job. Sometimes they can be negative as well, as far as like sometimes an ENGO, environmental non-governmental agency, or organization, can also negatively lean public perception. When it comes to bycatch and stuff, they can make it seem like something's a lot worse than it actually is. So I take caution, because I'm a conservationist at heart. That's why we're
Yeah.
aligned. That's why I'm on the policy council, because I do think it's important that we, or it's near and dear to my heart of the human impact that we have on the ocean and on the planet in general. So first and foremost, that's what's important to me. But I also want to recognize that sometimes if an ENGO can bring extra attention to something like bycatch, when it's really like, oh, this fishery is really dirty, because it has 60% bycatch, or that's high, but some example of a negative connotation of a fishery that can be misconstrued information, because that bycatch is actually just like blue sharks or something that are shaken off the hook and they're released live, and it's not a big deal. There's no real impact because that's not a marketable species. They're not being released dead and that sort of stuff. So I do think that I don't know where my brain just went off on that little rabbit hole with that, but I think that those organizations are important to have a connection to the community, because that connection does mean activation, because that public that's part of that organization can then reach out to their representatives and voice their opinion that, hey, this is really important to focus on, or to make sure that you're taking note that this does matter to the public. So yes, there's some good engagement there, but taking caution with, so that it's not just negatively misconstrued that commercial fisheries are bad.
Right, for sure. And I think that's what my thinking there was, that it is the culinary community, the restaurateurs have an opportunity to do that education. And I think the more
Definitely.
opportunity we can do that, and education means the full picture, not just, a bumper sticker, save the whales. It's,
Yes.
here's why you should make a good choice when you're dining out, and I'm going to get to the fishmonger side of this in a sec, but when you're making a purchase, you need to know that don't you need to know the true picture, right? Is that fair way to put it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is one of the things that so many consumers are disconnected with their food source. So
Mhm.
those organizations can help to paint a better picture, or inform or educate a consumer on those choices and where they're coming from, and just connect them a little bit more to those choices. So yes, overall, it's a great way to do that. And they're a great channel to do that. Yeah, because bottom line, people need to be more educated, and they need to know more about where their food is coming from. We've strayed so far away from that as a consumer, all this stuff, and we don't even know what the hell is in it, all these ingredients and where it's coming from, any of that. So we need to start stepping back towards like finding the reality of where our food sources are coming from.
Well, as you said, the Magnuson Stevens Act has set up some of the best fisheries on the planet,
Yes.
and that provides good, healthy protein to the American people. But if they don't know, and so to me, having the restaurateurs, and I suspect it wouldn't be hard for me to have you enthusiastically encourage your peers in the restaurant community, in the culinary community, to do that education.
Yeah, to be engaged, to keep learning, and is that what you mean, for them to
Yeah.
learn, or to convey the messages
Well,
to the
and for
consumers?
them to do the kind of um, education in place, right? Let people know. I mean, I see it in my local restaurant, where on the blackboard it says where the fish is sourced, and
That's right.
and I see it for on the terrestrial side as well. And I mean, I seem to think, but you're the pro. I mean, does it make sense for restaurants to be doing that? Good business?
It absolutely does. The problem is, yes, and so that's exactly one of the other features of this new Monterey Bay Best Choice Restaurant program that they just released, they just launched, is not only that little mark that shows what the best choice is, like which menu item has the green best choice seafood item, but it also uh, encourages the restaurant to identify where that species is coming from, because that helps to educate the consumer that it does matter where it's coming from. Because, this is a great example of it. So you go to a restaurant and it says herb crusted salmon, or you go to a different restaurant and it says wild Northwest Copper River king salmon, with blah 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 blah, where it has more description in that menu item. And some people, when I eat out at restaurants, obviously being a culinarian, people are like, "Oh, do you just pick apart all the restaurants?" And I was like, "Well, no, not necessarily. I enjoy my dining experiences, and I'm not going to scrutinize everyone for everything. I get lots of ideas from going to a lot of places. But one thing I will say is when they ask me, and they're like, "Well, where do you think that comes from?" I was like, "Well, I guarantee you, your herb crusted salmon description on the menu just means it's shitty farm raised Atlantic salmon that's crap." And because if they were paying more money for wild Alaskan king salmon or whatever, coho salmon, sockeye salmon, whatever it may be, they would write that in the description. So it is important to have those descriptors on the menu, and that, so that people get more used to asking the question of where that's coming from. And the more consumers do that, when the server asks the chef, "Hey, where's this coming from? Hey, this other customer is asking where that's coming from," then the chef is going to start making better choices about his or her sourcing, because more people are asking the questions. So it is super important for the consumer to ask the questions. Be the pain in the ass. If you ever watch that Portlandia show, it's like the lady that was like asking what the chicken's name is and what farm it was from and that. And it's like, yes, be that, because the more we're like that as consumers, the better choices the chefs or the fish markets are going to make when they come to put that food in front of you, because people are asking the questions.
That's awesome.
That's
awesome. Well, an educated consumer is essential for all the way down the, if you will, the policy supply chain, from when people understand, hey, if we don't have good habitat, to have good fisheries, to have good laws that make sure that we have those habitats and fisheries management and data collection and all that, you're going to get, and this will be a Waterside Chat buzzword, herb crusted salmon. You're going to get, and now we know what that means.
Yep.
Right? So
unidentified herb crusted salmon.
Yeah, exactly. And I think more people are beginning to ask those questions, and I think we should continue to encourage them to do that.
Absolutely.
So let me have you put your fishmonger hat on.
Yeah.
So similar questions, like, are the fishmongers beginning to understand that they should be advertising or explaining where their fish came from, what it is? What is it like being a fishmonger in 2026?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, prices are going up, so it's kind of hard to, to sometimes to swallow, even like to put a price tag on something that's $36.99 a pound or whatever that number may be. Sometimes upwards of that for fancy stuff, which I have I struggle with sometimes, because I'm coming from somebody who's always made sure that I had lots of accessibility. So for the full range of prices, from rockfish that's $12.99 to $35.99 a pound stuff. So it's I'm always going to continue to be that, but sometimes I have to make sure that we're ordering in enough stuff that is that lower range stuff, so that I don't just be perceived as a high end fancy fishmonger, because that's always been important, is accessibility to me. So that's, I guess, my first thing on fishmongering 101 in the current era. It's tough right now on the fishing world. It's tough to get fishermen to go out. It's these, coast to coast. It's a challenging equation with the costs that have gone up as they are, the fuel that it is, the lack of infrastructure that there are in ports. These are all things that I know that we were going to talk about today, as well as, like working waterfronts and that. And it's unfortunately, it's still a really challenging time for fishermen. So for me, as somebody who likes to source as direct as possible to those fishermen, it's tough, because even Portland is only an hour and a half from the closest port, Garibaldi. But even that hour and a half gap, fishermen aren't coming into Portland to deliver the fish themselves. So you got to find somebody else to be able to bring it into town, and then fishermen kind of go out, and then sometimes they'll come back in on this date or that date. And as a restaurant, if you got something on the menu, you got to make sure you got 50 pounds of it in so that you can process it and then, have it available to sell that day or for the next day. And when it's inconsistent, that's really tough for retailers or restaurateurs or chefs to work with. So that's kind of also part of the equation, that it's really tough to work directly with fishermen, although that's my primary. I'd like to work with fishermen more than any, first and foremost, I'm always going to choose from as small and as local and as direct as possible to the fishermen. Sure. But it makes it a little tough. But not everybody's like me either. Like most of the time, they're not going to deal with that guy or the gal, because it is more difficult. It's inconsistent. It's unreliable. It's better quality product all the time. But because of those inconsistency in the invoices and writing a check and whatever, all that stuff, it makes it more difficult. And so most people just won't even deal with it. They'll just get it from their wholesaler, which then it makes it tough for the fishermen, because they get less money when they sell it to a wholesaler versus selling it direct, and just makes it a tough equation. So so that's kind of some of the challenges that we work with as fishmongers.
For sure.
I love that word, don't you? Fishmonger.
I love it. No, I think it's fishmongers. And then, so Natalie's your wife?
Yes.
So is she a fishwife?
Not as much. She's always kind of done her own thing. She's not really part of the business.
Phenomenal photographer.
Yes, she is.
A little plug for Natalie's terrific photography work.
Thank you.
But so you've laid out some of the concerns, but from a business perspective, how do you see sustainable fishing? What does that mean to you guys?
Well, so sustainability, that's a tricky word, because it's kind of a tag word. And, some places like to greenwash that word. They say that they have their banners about sustainability, but in reality, their principles are not very sustainable at all. So it is a tricky word. If you're a Whole Foods, for example, for sustainability for them, they have to have certified sustainable fisheries. So it's got to have the blue check mark for MSC, or it's got to be rated on the Seafood Watch, Monterrey Bay Seafood Watch program, for yellows or greens, and to avoid the reds and that sort of stuff. So those are more certified sustainable fisheries. And those are great, because those are larger corporations and they are broad across the board. So to have those like principles and guidelines in place are still better than not having them. So that's all good. For me, like a little deeper level of sustainability is like what I kind of mentioned, where I always prefer to buy it as direct and local and all that as possible. So that's like a whole nother level of sustainability, where it's like, how can we go support these guys and gals that are in these coastal communities that are trying to make a living, struggling making a living. And, I may pay them a little bit more even for their product, and I can get it through the wholesaler. And it's even better, because then it gives them a little extra money. It's a much better product. So it lasts longer for me. Like if the fish come right out of the water, it can last for a week, no problem. Right. And whereas a lot of times that week gets used up when it's sitting in the wholesalers' walk-in coolers and that sort of thing. So that's like a whole nother level of sustainability for me, even if those fisheries or that fisherman doesn't have a check mark on their sustainability rankings. That's something that Whole Foods requires. That's not something that I require. Right. So I kind of have additional layers of sustainability that are important to me, that I think make a difference. And that's what makes a difference as a fish market too. I get in little, one-off products that I'll get 5 or 10 pounds of something in, spot prawns or this or that, or smelts that are amazing. And people that know sand dabs,
Right.
that sort of stuff. And which those larger guys really aren't getting that one-off stuff. They don't deal so well with one-off stuff. So those are things that are important to me, especially the less desirable things, because that's another level of sustainability, is that we have to get away from just, Paul, what's his name's the Four Fish book, of we our main species that we consume in the United States are shrimp primarily, and then canned tuna, salmon, cod. Those four fish are the main thing. So we've got to get away from that so that we start eating, consuming, ordering more unknown things that are also delicious and super healthy and nutritious, and often lower on the food chain. So there's less bioaccumulation of toxins like mercury, but people we're still trying to train people to get used to dealing with those sorts of things. But that's another level of sustainability, if you ask me, is like really being broad. Paul Greenberg. Thank you.
And so
great book, by the way. All of his books were wonderful.
We'll put that in the show notes.
A
link to
the
Paul's.
Omega Principle and Four Fish and Eat Like a Fish, I think, whatever. So go ahead, Tom.
No, and so it's this is an interesting aspect of the of federal policy, is when we think about marine resources, we often hear about overfishing, but there are species that, as you were saying, that are delicious and nutritious that don't get the attention, if you will, that some do. And how do you as a fishmonger, how do you as a restaurateur go about I guess selling's the right word, selling the consumer on, hey, eat X, Y, and Z, eat monkfish as opposed to something else?
Well, it's exactly what you just said. We're a perfect conduit to train the consumers to do that, because so many times people, like, the majority of seafood that's consumed is consumed at restaurants, because cooking seafood can be a little daunting for some people, because it's expensive, and it's actually not as tricky as people think, because it doesn't take as long to cook, and most people overcook it.
Right.
But a lot of people eat at restaurants, so we have that opportunity to already have this captivated audience. And if for me, I've earned my customer credibility and trust. So really, whatever we get in, they're like, okay, I can give that a shot. Or we've got an email newsletter that we send out every week that has, recipe ideas and what we have coming in, what oysters we have in. So it gives people like food for thought. So we are the perfect conduit to be able to present these things, smelt fries, fries with eyes.
Fries with eyes.
Do fun shit that like makes people be like, if they're a little bit adventurous, which consumers in Portland are pretty adventurous. They're food people. They care about the environment and that. So a lot of times people are willing to try stuff, and especially when we've got 15 years of delivering for them, and they trust me wholeheartedly. And it's a great opportunity to present to them new ideas and new species. The Chefs Collaborative about 15 years ago had a campaign called Trash Fish campaign. And that was a great one, because it was all about all these undesirable, unrepresented, just lesser species that are actually still all amazing. And it was a awareness campaign for the consumer. And we need more stuff like that, more stuff that like brings more attention to those more unknown stuff.
Well, there's a direct line, at least in my mind, that if we have consumers demanding sustainable fish, that then once we educate them that, here's the policy that will lead to that they can then add their voices to the people who are talking to the policymakers, saying, hey, we need to have healthy habitats. We need to have good fisheries management. We need to have, the information available so that we can manage our fisheries. And it's not a, nice to have, it's a must have because of what it creates for the American consumer. Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So keep cognizant of the time here. It's I want to go to working waterfronts. It's your, notwithstanding the Sandpoint, Idaho conversation we had earlier, but in Portland, in coastal communities, the waterfront has different connotations to different people. But for you as a fishmonger, for you as a restaurateur, for you as a policy advocate, what does a thriving working waterfront look like to you?
So for me, working waterfront is, that quintessential fishing boat docks where the guys are coming with their totes off of the dock, and there's people, there's dogs running around, and it smells like low tide, and it's like the classic going to the coast to see. I know on the East Coast you've got a lot of them like that, and
For sure.
West Coast there's a handful, a little bit less, I would say, than even on the East Coast, but one where so that's from a consumer perspective of like, what do they see when it's a working waterfront? Is those fishing boats out there? From me as a policy guy, as a connector to the working waterfronts, to my restaurant, to the consumers through the fish market, I see that as also a place that's truly accessible for fishermen. So one of the challenges, and one of the things that, I know the network has worked on is some of these working waterfronts bills, along with Young Fisherman Bill, and now we're working on some fisheries insurance and that sort of stuff. There's also a lack of infrastructure, and what's happening, and so how I foresee what I was kind of saying out of that is, what I see as a working waterfront is also one where fishermen have access to fuel, to bait, to ice, openly. So one of the challenges on the West Coast is that not all the ports have those amenities, fuel, bait, or ice, and some of them are owned by the private wholesaler, the big guys that are on the coast, and I don't even have to name any names, but the larger seafood wholesalers. And what happens is the fishermen, they would like to be able to buy fuel, bait, or ice from those places on the coast, but those wholesalers won't sell them fuel, bait, or ice unless they sell their catch to that wholesaler. So now they have they've bought those amenities because they often are the ones with the depth of finances, of resources to be able to do that and to run those operations. But then they won't sell those amenities to that the basic infrastructure the fisherman needs to be able to go out and fish. So now a fisherman can't fish that port. He can't keep his boat there because there's nowhere to get fuel, bait, or ice, or all three, or one of them. So that's what I also see is like true infrastructure that's not just a stiff arm of these large corporations that have a stronghold on the fishermen, that it's a true open marketplace where fishermen can fish and they have access to the infrastructure that they need to be able to fish. And they have the choice of who they want to sell their catch to, because that's often what happens is these wholesalers are their lifeline. If they get cut off from that wholesaler, then all of a sudden they go out and spend thousands of dollars to go out on a trip for fuel, bait, and ice and crew. And then if they come back in and that processor won't buy that fish from them, that's a ticking time bomb where they just spent all this money to go catch this fish and they got nobody to sell it to, and they're stuffed. So that's, to me as well, to answer your question, what a working waterfront for me looks like.
No, and so that's exactly what I was looking for. Is you've got people say access, and I don't, and I don't think they understand what they mean. But what you're saying is, and I'm not going to get into the semantics, but it's fuel, bait, and ice to me are integral parts, and not and amenities
Essential.
felt like there was less than what they really are, and they are essentials to operations for a small commercial fisherman.
Yeah, that's true. Amenities kind of seems like a swimming pool at a hotel.
Yeah,
You don't
exactly.
have to have that.
You got it better than that. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's the word of the trade. So
Yeah.
But if a working waterfront looks healthy because there's a large processor, but the small boat guys can't get those essentials of fuel, bait, and ice, it's a problem. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so I think the policymakers have to understand that a thriving working waterfront provides access to small businesses.
Yes.
And that we lose small businesses when we lose those working waterfronts, those communities of small businesses, whether they're fuel dealers or ice makers or bait purveyors. It's if those become condos, if they become
That's right.
waterfront hotels, those small businesses lose out. I mean, I watched some of this where I grew up in spending my summers in Newport, Rhode Island, and which was a very much of a fishing community. And I watched that waterfront change from what it was when I was a kid. And my grandfather was insured a lot of those small fishing boats. And
yeah.
So it resonates with me. And this is the thing that from a network point of view, we see an important role for the network to play in doing that kind of education on what a working waterfront really is.
Yep.
And I think you've done a terrific job of explaining that, and I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you. Appreciate it.
It's coming up on the hour. I want to.
Yeah, I'm getting. Time. Look at that. Colin's on us. Time.
Yeah. So
which I need to get rolling as well. So that works.
Well,
perfect.
then let me do this. Let me give you the last word, if you will. If there's anything you'd like to share with us, sort of like, how do you like being part of the network, and what can we do to help you? Or just any last words?
Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me on. It's always wonderful to chat with you and to collaborate and to brainstorm. I've listened to a lot of these, and I've always wished that my opportunity presented itself. So I'm happy to be here and share my experience and my knowledge with you all. And I in final words for this, I just onward and upward. We're just going to keep tackling each problem as best as we can, and keep using our resources to be able to collaborate with the people that we need to collaborate with the congressional offices that can help us and work together to create some really cool legislation and awareness, and try to educate the consumer better on sustainable seafood and marine fish, and how we can conserve it by making better choices. And that's ultimately the goal, right? Is because I know I want to have my kids be able to have the resources in the ocean that we've been able to have, just like you growing up in Rhode Island as well, and spending those summers to be able to have the fruits of the labor. And that's what my goal is as well, is to continue to pass on that sustainability and our precious resource. And all we got to do is just keep managing it right, and then it'll keep producing for itself. All we got to do is just not take too many. And it's an amazing thing that it just keeps on replenishing itself as long as we just don't take too many. What a concept.
And what a concept is right. Well, thank you, Lyf. Really appreciate it. Won't be the last time we have you on. And stay tuned.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that wraps up this Waterside Chat. And the next one's in the works, and you'll hear about it. And for now, I'm going to say thank you and goodbye.
If you enjoyed this episode of Waterside Chat, share it with your friends and colleagues. You can check us out on YouTube or most podcast services. To stay up to date on Waterside Chats and the Marine Fish Conservation Network, sign up for emails at conservefish.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next Waterside Chat.